All right, welcome back, readers. I hope you're ready for Chapter 2 of Dodger. I've been enjoying it so far. I mean, I only read like the first 20 pages, but it's quite a good read. So we'll see what happens in Chapter 2. Chapter 2, in which Dodger meets a dying man and a dying man meets his lady, and Dodger becomes king of the Toshers. Well, that's pretty cool. As the bells tolled 5 o'clock, Ms. Sharples woke up, making a noise that could be best expressed as a blort. Her eyes filled with venom when they alighted on Dodger, and subsequently scoured the room for indications of malfeasance. "All right, you young castle, you have had your nice warm sleep in a Christian bedroom, as promised, and I suspect for the first time. Now, just you get out of here, and mind, I shall be watching you like a fork until you're out of the back door. You mark my words." Nasty and ungrateful, those words were, she was as good as them, marching him down the grubby back stairs and into the kitchen, where she flung open the door with such a force that it bounced on its hinges and slammed itself shut again, much to the amusement of the cook, who had been watching the performance. As the door hung there reproachfully, Dodger said, "You heard Mr. Charlie, missus. He's a very important man, and he gave me a mission, and I have a mission, so I reckon, and a missionary gets a bite of breakfast before he's slung out into the cold, and I don't think Mr. Charlie would be too happy if I told him about the lack of hospitality you've shown me, Miss Sharp-a-Balls." He had mangled her name offensively without a thought, and was rather pleased, even though she appeared not to have noticed. The cook, however, had, and the laugh she laughed had a sneer in it. Dodger had never read a book, but if he had ever done so, he would have read The Cook just like it, and it was amazing how much you could glean from a look, or snort, or even a fart if it was dropped in the conversation at just the right place. There was a language, and there was the language of inflections, glances, tiny movements in the face, little bits of habit that the owner was not aware of. People who thought that their faces were entirely blank did not realize how they were broadcasting their innermost thoughts to anyone with the gumption to pick up on the signs. And the sign right now, floating in the air as if held by an angel, said that the cook did not like the housekeeper, and the dislike was sufficient enough that she would make fun of her even though Dodger was standing there. So he carefully made himself look a little more tired and a little more frightened and a little more pleading than usual. Instantly, the cook motioned him towards her, saying in a low voice, but not so low that the housekeeper couldn't hear it, "Okay, lad, I've some porridge on the boil. You can have some of that, and a piece of mutton that's only slightly on the nose, and I dare say you've eaten worse. Will that do you?" Dodger burst into tears. They were good tears, full of soul, smirking. Soul and fat. I skipped a page. And there was a certain amount of body to them. And then he fell on his knees, clasped his hands together, and said, with deep sincerity, "God bless you, missus. God bless you." This shameless pantomime earned him a very large bowl of porridge with a very acceptable amount of sugar in it. The mutton wasn't yet at the stage when it was about to start walking around all by itself, and so he took it thankfully. It would at least make a basis of a decent stew. It was wrapped in newspaper, and he shoved it in his pocket very quickly for fear that it might evaporate. As for the porridge, he pushed the spoon around until there was not one drop left, to the obvious approval of the cook, a lady, it might be said, who wobbled everywhere one could wobble when she moved, including the chin. He had written her down as an ally, at least against the housekeeper, who was still glaring at him balefully, but then she grabbed him sharply by the hand and shouted, much louder than necessary, "Just you come down here into the scullery and we'll see how much you have stolen, my lad, shall we?" Dodger tried to pull out of her grip, but she was, as aforesaid, a well-built woman, as cooks tend to be, and as she was dragging him, she leaned towards him and hissed, "Don't struggle! What are you, a bloody fool? Keep mum and do as I say." She opened the door and dragged him down some stone steps into a place that smelled of pickles. After slamming the door behind them, she relaxed a little and said, "That old baggage of a housekeeper will swear blind that you must have picked up a lot of trinkets when you were here last night, and you may be sure that the picker-up of said trifles will be that lady herself. Therefore, it would be very likely that any friendships you have made here will vanish like the morning dew. The family are decent sorts, always a soft touch for a hard luck story from a broken down artisan or fallen woman who would like to get up again, and I've seen them come and go. Quite a lot of them are genuine, let me tell you, I know. As politely as possible, Dodger tried to remove her hands from his person. She seemed to be putting him down rather more than was warranted, and with a certain enthusiasm and a gleam in her eye. She saw his expression and said, I ain't always been this old fat baggage. I fell once and bounced back up. That's the way to think about it, lad. Anyone can rise if they have enough yeast. I was not always like this. Oh, you would be amazed and probably quite amused, and I might say in 1 or 2 cases, embarrassed. Yes, missus, said Dodger, and would you please stop patting? She laughed, causing an oscillation of chins, and then rather more solemnly said, the kitchen maid told me in the talk is that you helped save some sweet girl from ruffians last night, and I just know you will get blamed for something unless I show you the lay of the land. So, little fellow, you just give Auntie quickly here anything you think of running away with, and I will see it gets put back where it belongs. I like this family, and I won't have them robbed even by a lively lad such as yourself. So if you own up now, all sins will be forgiven, and you will walk out of here without a stain on your character, although I wish I could say the same about the stains on the rest of you. Her nose wrinkled as she took in the state of his trousers. Smirking, Dodger handed her 1 silver spoon, saying, 1 spoon, and only 'cause I was still holding it when you dragged me down here. Then he pulled out the pack of cards. And this, missus, was handed to me by Mr. Dickens. Nevertheless, but with a grin, the cook patted him down again right there and then, finding his knife, his brass knuckles, and his short crowbar. She pointedly ignored them, but also made him take off his shoes for inspection, whereupon she winced at the smell, with a hand theatrically over her nose, and made it clear that she wanted him to put them on again as quickly as possible. She said cheerfully, Not got nothing up your jack, yes? Wouldn't be the first to have tried. No, I ain't gonna look. You got more meat on your ribs than most of your type, which means you are rather innocent, or very clever. I trust that it's the latter, and I'll be most surprised if it's the former. Now what we'll do next is I'll drag you upstairs, shouting at you like the scum you are, so the old baggage can hear. What I shall shout is that I've searched you thoroughly at risk to my own health, and are throwing you out absolutely empty-handed. After that, I will kick you out the door on the toe of my boot for the look of the thing, and then I'll get on with my work, which will be all the more enjoyable when I think of the nasty old boot seething like a cauldron of bees. She gave Dodger a long look as if sizing him up and said, You're on the tosh, ain't you? Oh, yes, missus. Lot of work for not much money, so I hear. Never tell anybody everything, so he said, Oh, well, I don't know, missus. I just makes a living. Now come on, let's do the pantomime for them, as is surely listening, and off you go. But remember, come and see quickly if you ever feel the need for a friend. I mean what I say. If I can ever help you, you just have to whistle. And if I knock on your door in hard times, don't leave it shut. Outside, the sun was hardly visible in the smoke, mist, and fog. But that was the clear light of day for someone like Dodger. But if sunshine was okay, he would agree because it helped your clothes dry. But Dodger liked the shadows and, if possible, the sewers. And right now, something in him wanted the solace of darkness. So he crowbarred the lid of the nearest drain cover and dropped into what wasn't all that bad a surface down below. The storm last night had been kind enough to make the sewers just that bit more bearable. There would be other toshers down here, of course, but Dodger had a nose for gold and silver. Solomon said his dog, Onan, had a nose for jewelry. Indeed, Dodger was happy to give him the honor because he had to feel quite sorry for the creature, who was really quite embarrassing at times, but for some reason the dog's pointed little face did actually light up whenever he smelled rubies. Sometimes Dodger would take him down into the gloom with him, and if Anon's amazing nose found wealth down there in the darkness, then when they got back home, Solomon would give him extra chicken gizzards. Dodger wished he had that dog with him today, for Onan had ears so good that he could hear a sudden shower miles upstream and would bark accordingly, but he had started in the wrong area without the time to go and fetch him, so he had to make do the best he could, which, after all, was pretty good at that. If you were smart on your feet, like Dodger, you'd have grabbed your loot and been up in the fresh air long before the first surge of the storm water came down the sewers. But it was as if last night's storm had emptied the sky. It was as calm as a mill pond down in the tunnels today, Small puddles here and there with a little trickle down the center of the sewer. After the storm, it mostly smelled like, well, wet, dead things, rotten potatoes, bad air. These days, unfortunately, shite. This always infuriated Dodger. From what Solomon told him, some coves called the Romans had built the sewers to keep the rainwater flowing down to the Thames instead of pouring into people's houses. But these days, toffs here and there were getting pipes run for their cesspits into the sewers, and Dodger thought this was really unfair. It was bad enough with all the rats around here without having to make certain you didn't step in a Richard. Richard, Cockney rhyming slang, short for Richard III, which rather happily rhymes with another interesting word. I'm sure you guys could figure it out. That was a footnote. I like that a lot. I'll have to make use of that. A fair amount of light filtered down from the gutters through the drain covers, which themselves had holes to keep in them to keep the water from running away. But really, being a tosher meant that you felt around, with fingers and toes sometimes, for all those little heavy things that would get caught up on the crumbling brickwork as the water went past. But you had to search with your mind and your instinct as well, and that was the soul and center of being a tosher. Old Granddad had taught him that, telling him that it could get so much part of you that you could smell the gold even among the Richards. Dodger didn't know much about the Romans, but the sewers they had built were old and in a general state of falling to bits. Oh, gangs came down here to patch things up occasionally, and there was always a bit of work here and a bit of work there, seldom anything very substantial. The work gangs, who were handed an official job occasionally, shoring up and repairing bits of the ever-crumbling sewers, would chase you off if they found you, though they were not as young as Dodger, so he could easily leave them behind. Besides, they were working men with working hours, and a tosher might work all night on a good night, feeling in those little places where a brick had fallen out the wall, or the floor was not level. Best of all were the places where the water would swirl around in a little whirlpool, causing pennies, sixpence, farthings, half-farthings, and, if you were very, very blessed, sometimes even sovereigns, half-sovereigns, and crowns to collect. Maybe even brooches, silver hatpins, eyeglasses, watches, and golden rings. They would all swirl around in this dark carousel, a great spinning ball of sticky mud, which, if you were a lucky tosher and believed in the Lady of the Toshers, then you, yes you, might be the lucky tosher who one day found a ball of mud like a big plum pudding. This was that wonderful thing known to the toshers as the tosheroon, which, when you smashed it open, would deliver unto you a fortune of a lifetime. Dodger had found all of those things separately at some time or another, and occasionally one or two together in a little nest in a crack, which he would make note of in his head and, of course, return to again. But while he could often come back with some goods that would make Solomon smile, he had never come across a great pie of dirt and jewels and money that was the key to a better life. But, he thought, what better life was there than the life on the Tosh, at least if you were a Dodger? The world, which meant London, was built for him, just for him. It worked in his favor as if the lady had meant it. Gold, jewels, and currency were heavy and got trapped easily, while dead cats, rats, and Richards tended to float, which was a good thing because you never like to tread in a dicky. Thank goodness they floated. But Dodger mused, as he almost absent-mindedly but very methodically felt his way along the sewer, taking care to cover his favorite traps while at the same time keeping an eye out for any new ones. Whatever would a tosher do if he got hold of such things as a real tosheroon? He knew them, the tosher lads, and when they had a good day, what did they do with their loot? What did they do with all the hard-earned money they had splashed through the muck for? They drank it, and the bigger the amount, the more they drank. Maybe if they were sensible ones, they'd put a bit aside for a bed for the night and a meal. In the morning, they would be poor again. There was a clink under his fingers. That was the sound of 2 sixpence together in a spot he called Old Faithful. Good start. Dodger knew that he had the edge on the other toshers. That's why he had broken every other tosher rule and gone into a sewer during a storm. And it would have worked too if he hadn't been for that fight and what had followed. Because if you had your eye to business, you could see places in the sewers where a tosher could hang on in a bubble of air while all around him the world raged. He'd found a good one, and while it was damned chilly, he would have been the first one down in the vicinity to reap the harvest of the night. Right now he had to hurry because the other toshers would be coming up the sewers toward him, and suddenly there was a glint in the gloom as the sun caught something. It went away instantly, but he had marked it in his mind, so he worked his way carefully to where his head told him the glint had been, and found a pile of muck on a little sandbank, Where the outflow of a smaller sewer flowed into this one, it was still dribbling. There it was, a dead rat, and in its jaws what looked like a gold tooth, but turned out to be, as it happened, a half-sovereign gripped tightly in the teeth of Mr. Rat. You never, if you could help it, touched a rat, which is why Dodger carried a crowbar with him down there. Using it together with his knife, he levered the nasty little jaws open and flicked the half-sovereign out. Balancing the coin on the blade of his knife, he held it up to the trickle coming down the wall, giving it something of what you might call a wash. May every day be as good as this. Who would be a working man on such a day? A skilled chimney sweep would have to work a week to get money he had picked up today. Oh, to be a tosher on a day like this. Then he heard the groan. Dodger edged away round the rat into a smaller sewer, which was half choked with debris, much of it pieces of wood, some of them sharp as knives, and all the other detritus that had last night been dislodged. But to Dodger's astonished gaze, it appeared that most of the debris was a man, and the man did not look well. There was nothing very much where one eye should have been. The other one was opening now, and it looked Dodger in the face. It stank. The face Dodger looked down into, and he shuddered because he knew it. He said, "That's you, Grandad, isn't it?" The oldest tosher in London looked up as if he had been tortured, and Dodger almost threw up when he saw the rest of him. He must have been working by himself, just like Dodger, and got caught up when the flood came down. And there would have been everything in it, anything that someone had thrown away or lost or wanted to hide and dispose of. A lot of it had apparently smashed into Grandad, who was nevertheless trying to sit upright, covered in bruises, bleeding, and colored with all sorts of nastiness such as only a flooded sewer could provide. Grandad spat mud, at least Dodger hoped it was only mud, and said weakly, "Oh, it's you, Dodger. Good to see you in such fine fettle, in a manner of speaking. You're a good lad, I always said so. Smarter than I ever was, see? Oh, so what I want you to do right now is to get a pint of the worst brandy you can find, bring it down here and pour it down this thing, what used to be my throat, right?" Dodger tried to pull some of the stuff away from the old man, who groaned and mumbled, "Trust me on this one. I'm banged up about like nobody's business, fool that I am. And at my age, too. Should have known better, silly old fool. I reckon I've eaten more than my peck today, so it's time to die. Be a lovely lad and get me liquor right now. There's a good boy. There's a sixpence and a crown and 5 pennies in my right hand, and they're still there 'cause I can feel it. And that is all for you, my lad, you lucky boy." "Here," said Dodger. "I'm not taking anything from you, Grandad." The old tosher shook his head, as was left of it, and said, "Firstly, I ain't really your Grandad. You boys only give me that name just 'cause I'm older than you lot are. And by the lady, you will take my stuff when I'm gone, 'cause you are a tosher, and a tosher will take what he finds. Now I knows where I am, and I knows there's a bottle shop just around the corner, up there downstream. Brandy, I said, the worst they got, and then remember me fondly. Now piss off right now or be followed by the curse of a dying tosher." Dodger came out the next drain, cover at a run, found the rather greasy bottle shop, bought 2 bottles of a brandy that smelled as if it could cut a man's leg off, and was back climbing down the drain almost before the echoes of his leaving Grandad died away. Grandad was still there, and was dribbling something cruel, but there was almost a smile when he saw Dodger, who handed him the first bottle, which he threw down his throat in one long glug. Some of it spilled out of his mouth as he beckoned for the other one, saying, "This'll suit me just right enough. Oh, yes, indeed. Just the way a tosher should go." Then he dropped his voice to a whisper, and with his one relatively good hand, he grabbed at Dodger and said, "I saw her, lad, the lady, standing large as life, just where you are now, all crimson and gold and shining like the sun on a sovereign. Then she blew me a kiss and beckoned to me and scarpered, only in a ladylike way, of course." Dodger didn't know what to say, but managed to say it anyway. "You've taught me a lot, Grandad. You taught me about the Lady of the Rats. So look, get the taste of the sewer out your mouth, and then I reckon I can pull you out of here to somewhere better. Let's give it a try, please." "Not a chance, lad. I reckon if you were to pick me up right now, I'd fall to bits. But if you don't mind, you will find the time to stay with me for a little while." In the darkness, there was another liquid noise as Granddad took a further draught of the fiery brandy and went on. You was a bloody good learner, I will say that for you. I mean, most of the lads I see doing it just don't have a nose for toshing. But it done me good all these years to see how you was treating toshing like one of them professors going through all them books. I seen you look at a whole pile of shite, and your eyes would twinkle like you knew there was something worthwhile under there. That's what we do, lad. We find value in what them above throw away, what they don't care about. And that means people, too. I seen you toshing, lad, and I know you toshing in your blood just like me. He coughed, and bits of his broken body moved in rather ghastly dance. I know what they call me, Dodger, king of the toshers. The way I see it, that's you now, and you have my blessing on it. What was left of his mouth smiled. Never did know who your dad was, did you, lad? No, Granddad, said Dodger. Never knew, and probably neither did my ma. Don't know who she was, neither. Water dripped off the ceiling as Dodger stared at nothing much and said, But you were always Granddad to me. I certainly know that, and you hadn't given me the knowing of Toshin. I never would have found out about all them places down here in the month of Sundays, like the Maelstrom and the Queen's Bedroom and the Golden Maze and the Sovereign Street and Button Back Spin and Breathe Easy. Ah, yes, that place saved my bacon dozens of times while I was still learning. Thank you for that, Granddad. Granddad? Granddad! Then Dodger was aware of something in the air, perhaps the subtle sound of something that had been there and then gently ceased to be so. But there was still something there, and as Dodger leaned over, he felt something carried on the last breath and was simply hovering, as Granddad said, from wherever he was now. I can see the lady, lad. I can see the lady. Granddad was smiling at him and went on smiling until the light in his eyes faded, when Dodger then leaned down and respectfully opened the man's hand to take the legacy that was duly his. He counted out 2 coins, which he solemnly placed on the dead man's eyes because, well, it was something you had to do because it had always been done. Then he looked into the gloom and said, Lady, I'm sending to you Granddad, a decent old cove who taught me all I know about the Tosh. Try not to upset him because he swears something cruel. He came out of the sewers as if hell and all its demons were following behind him. Suspecting that it might well be so, he ran the short distance to the 7 dials and to the comparative civilization that was in the little tenement attic where Solomon Cohen lived and worked and did business in a small room above a flight of stairs, which, being high up, gave him a view of things that he probably did not want to see. And that is the end of chapter 2. Sorry, I tripped over some of the words there. Yeah, we're moving along, learning a little bit more about Dodger. So until the next chapter, we'll see what Solomon's up to and what Dodger can learn from him.